Hello, everyone. My name is Jill Hawthorne, and I'm part of the Alumni and Family Engagement Team and Class of '87. And I want to welcome you to Pitzer at Home, where we offer virtual workshops, lectures, tutorials, and more featuring our Pitzer community. We are thrilled to bring you today's workshop with Michael O'Brien, parent Class of '23, and Chief Shift Officer at Peloton Executive Coaching. This is part one of a two-part workshop, and it's called How to Avoid Burnout and Maintain Your Energy. We've had an amazing response from the Pitzer community for this session. The session will be recorded and available on demand at Pitzer at Home for the remainder of the year. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our leadership coach, Michael O'Brien. Take it away, Michael.
Well, thanks, Jill. Good to be with everyone. And Jill, thank you again for all your assistance leading up to tonight, and Brooke as well. I'm thrilled to be with the Pitzer family. I'm a proud parent, class of '23. So we just love the vibe and energy of the Pitzer community, and to be able to talk about this topic, which, can we be honest, 2020 has been not the year that we all thought it would be. So I think this topic is front and center for us, especially as we go into the tail end of 2020 and hopefully flip the calendar into a better year in 2021. So I'm in New Jersey. I'm an East Coaster. So I'd love to know, like, just to start a little interaction, I want to make it interactive tonight. There's no breakouts. So if you're on the East Coast and happen to be in your pajamas, you're fine in terms of the breakout. So I'd love to know, like, where people are from. So if you can use the chat, just typing your state just to get a sense of where everyone's at. I'm assuming we're going to have a lot of folks on the West Coast. When my daughter, when she was in middle school, she had a vision that she'd go out to school in California, and she worked her way, and we're just thrilled that she's part of the Pitzer community. So Colorado, Portland, all right, we'll have PDX, another from Portland. So San Francisco, cool. Illinois, awesome. So, well, again, thanks for joining us tonight, this evening. What I want to do is be able to provide a few tips on how to sort of surf the wave known as 2020. And if something really resonates with you that I share, you can just put a little exclamation mark in the chat, sort of like this, how I do it. So if something I say really hits home, just jot something down there and we'll take her from there. And I have room at the end for questions. And I know some folks sent in some pre-questions. So Carlos, Nicole, and Karen, I have your question. I promise I'll answer it before the end of the evening. But if you have other questions that pop up, just type them in the chat, or we'll get to the end and Jill will help us facilitate. So to begin, I want to bring you back a few years. So that I think parallels what we're going through right now. And this is what the EMT said to me. Like, your bike is fine. Focus on yourself. Just try to breathe. This was their response to a question that, if we have any other cyclists in Zoom, you can totally appreciate. I asked them this very question: how's my bike? And they're like, your bike's fine. Focus on yourself. Just try to breathe. And it was right after I regained consciousness, because just a few minutes earlier, I was out in New Mexico for a corporate offsite. If you're in corporate America, you sort of know the drill. Back when we used to do it before COVID, we'd fly out on a Monday, fly back on a Friday. And in between those two departure dates or travel dates, they would try to torture you with PowerPoint and team building activities. And as an avid cyclist, and I was training for a bike race that week, I decided to bring my bike out. I wanted to cross New Mexico off the states I've ridden my bike. I had this goal, I still do, of riding in every one of the beautiful 50 states that we have in this country. And New Mexico had to be conquered. So I brought my bike out. Actually, I brought one of my buddies' bike out. And I found this beautiful loop out the back of the hotel, up the main drag, 2 miles. Thought I'd do 10 laps for 20 miles. And that'd be the smug one in my meeting, that I got outside and really experienced New Mexico. That I would, get my workout on outside the hotel gym, as all those other guys, that my coworkers, my colleagues, would sleep in, be lazy, so I could pass a little judgment on. At the time, I was 33. I was married 7 years, now married 26, 2 daughters, 3.5 years old. Grady, our youngest, who goes to Pitzer, was just about 7 months old. And I was the marketing director for my company's big drug. I was a little bit of a big fish in a small pond, if you will. And I tried to project this, hey, I'm calm on the outside, but to be honest, I was more stressed inside. A lot of us deal with our stress differently. Some people have an outer expression of stress. For me, I would just process it inside. And as I came around my fourth lap around a bend, this SUV was fully in my lane. He crossed over into my lane. The police estimate he was going about 40 miles an hour. And I saw him, and I swear he saw me, but I thought he would certainly see me in time to swerve and avoid me, but he never did. And I ran out of time. And I remember the sound of me hitting his grill, the sound of me going into his windshield, breaking, I think, a pretty impressive hole in it, the screech of his brakes, and the thud I made when I came to the asphalt below. As you can imagine, I was knocked unconscious. And when I regained consciousness, I asked that question that only another cyclist can truly appreciate. I asked the EMTs, how's my bike? And that's when they said, your bike's fine. By the way, it wasn't fine. It was totally destroyed. But they asked me to try to focus on myself and just try to breathe. And as I waited for the helicopter to take me to Albuquerque, the only trauma 1 center in the state, I just kept on thinking, this isn't my script. I was following the script I thought I had to follow growing up. You work hard in high school. I worked sort of hard. My youngest, my 2 daughters worked certainly much harder than I did. You go to college, get a job, maybe you meet someone, marry that someone, start raising a family, climb the corporate ladder. I thought that was the script I had to follow. That's the script, at least I thought I was given. And as I laid there in the worst pain that I've ever felt in my life, just the thought of moving was painful. I was wondering, like, is this what it feels like to die? This is not how it's supposed to be. I was in a change process and I had no warning. It all happened to me, to us as a family, to everyone around us. And as I, thought about my life and why I was so stressed, and I think a lot of people can really appreciate this, even current day, probably more so current day than back in 2001. The date of my accident was July 11, 2001. You'll later learn that I call that my last bad day. But back then, I thought I had to do more to be more. Growing up, I never felt like I really fit in. I always thought I was just that far away from actually making it, whatever that means in today's terms. Finding value, reaching a certain status, you name it. I just always thought, especially as I started my professional life, that I just had to do more. I had to work 1 more hour, do 1 more project, that I wasn't just there yet. In a lot of ways, I was chasing happiness. I thought to myself, and if this resonates, let me know, that, hey, I'll be happy when I get promoted, or I'll be happy when I buy that really fancy new car, or I'll be happy when this project is over. Then I'll make it. And the thing is that in my career, I got promoted, and my wife will tell you, I bought that fancy new car, and the projects ended, and I was happy. And then, like a lot of vapor finish lines, my happiness flew away, and I went back to chasing, sort of like that hamster on its hamster wheel. Now, I will totally date myself here, and if you are of a certain age, you might know the guy named Zig Ziglar. He's the guy that sort of was before Tony Robbins and all the guys that followed after. But he had this saying, I listened to his cassette tapes. That's how old I am in my Ford Taurus, which is a really hot car, I might add, if you have one perspective. But he used to talk about living a life in do, have, be. And even though I listened to his cassettes, I wasn't necessarily following his advice. I was chasing happiness. I thought I had to do more to be more. And this whole concept of do, have, be is do, hustle and grind, as folks like to say nowadays, 24/7, 365, just do more. Like we're almost like human doers instead of human beings. And if you're doing enough, if you do enough so you can actually provide value, at least that's the rationale in your head, as emotional as it is, not really rational, then you'll have more stuff. It's all those external merit badges that we go after. The right college, although I think Pitzer is the right college, but the right job, the right stuff, this, that, and everything. And then once you have all that stuff, then you can allow yourself to be. be considered a leader, be successful, be content, be happy, whatever it may be. It's like a merry-go-round or a hamster wheel. And I was doing that, hustle and grind, do more to be more, have the stuff that I thought was part of the script so I could be happy, I could be fulfilled, I can be a believer that I made it. And when I came out of the ICU, and that's for another talk, it was a really wild experience because I lived a pretty clean life up into the ICU. I started to learn a little bit about my accident. The doctors painted a pretty grim picture for me. They told my wife, had I been 10 years older or not in shape, I probably would have died before I got to the hospital. They told me about the extent of my injuries. I broke a whole bunch of everything. I also remember a whole bunch of everything that day. But the big injury was my left femur shattered, and when it did, it lacerated the femoral artery of my left leg. So that feeling like, hey, life may be in balance. This isn't part of my script. Well, indeed, that was true. The doctors were like, I'm not really sure how you did it, but you made it. Again, if you didn't have your health, you probably wouldn't have made it. But based on my injuries, they started to paint this grim picture of my future. More surgeries, more pain and suffering, maybe some like lack of independence or at least dependency, might not ride your bike ever again, may have to walk with certain limitations. And the picture they painted, at least how I heard it in the moment, was, holy cow, who am I going to become? Because I put all my identity, a lot of it, a good chunk of it in my career. And then obviously as a father and as a husband, but my job, I thought that was part of my script. I was the provider. So I wondered, like, if I can't be who I was, who will I be? And when I think back to March, when COVID really started hitting New York, New Jersey, obviously was hitting in San Francisco and Seattle. As a country, we struggled with this too. That when COVID hit, we knew that life was no longer going to be normal. I like to say normal and Elvis left the building about 4 months ago. But we still have yet to determine, like, who will we become? And that was the struggle I had. So all that emotion that we felt back in March, the worry, the anxiety, the fear, all that jazz, when the hospital got really quiet, I felt all that. In fact, I felt all that even when the hospital wasn't quiet. I was just trying to put on a brave face that we got this. And that was part me trying to convince myself that we got this. But I was worried. And so the emotions that we felt as a nation were so similar to the emotions I felt back in the early stages of my recovery. If we can't be who we were, who will we be? Now I know that people on this call have an opinion about who we want to be, but there's that struggle, there's that tension still, because we haven't yet realized it yet. We're creating it, we're shaping it. We just know that we can't reach back for normal because that's gone, and we're struggling with reaching towards our better, but that's possible. And as we deal with all this, as I dealt with it, what I didn't realize at first was I was going through the grief cycle. When you think about it, maybe many people on this call, someone who had COVID, maybe you've lost someone that had COVID. If you have, my deepest sympathy to those that you've lost. But we've all experienced loss on one level or another. So we're all going through some type of grieving process. And in the early stages of my recovery, I was going through it too. First there was denial. This didn't happen. This is not happening. And if you go back to like some of our commentary back in March and April, like this isn't happening. And then we get anger, right? And then we go through this cycle of maybe we'll bargain, a little depression, and eventually acceptance. Now, a whole bunch of folks have gotten to acceptance, like, hey, it's like this. This is what we need to do to get out in front of it. But we're not all there yet. So that tension is causing a lot of stress. That stress is basically leading us to a lot of burnout as we go through the yo-yo effects of one stressor after another. And I just love this quote by Sharon Salzberg. You might know who Sharon is. She's one of the meditation gurus here in the States. She's sort of probably well known for meditation, loving kindness. So I love this concept that grief is love when it doesn't have a normal place to go. And I think, we all are sort of living with that. Like we're not doing our lives in necessarily the normal place anymore. We're working from home, we're trying to live from home, we're doing all this, like everything is disrupted. So we all are grieving again in one way or another. And so I just love the fact that she brings this forward, just that connection between grief and love, because I think the way through this, because the only way through, right? Is through love. There's so much out there that's peddling in fear, but we have to like be able to rise up and like use love to get through this moment in time. And hopefully love for each other, even though we may not necessarily agree with each other. That's the hard part of all this. And we can see how hard it is. This is some data from the CDC back in August. So this balance between the economy and our health, and obviously I'm going to talk about equality and equity and an environment. We have just one of those is massive. Just one of those is a heavy lift, but we're dealing with 4 major lifts. So it's no wonder that we're feeling it. And I'm a big believer that we do need to feel what we need to feel. So then eventually we can handle what we can handle. But there's something that's happened, I think, over the last 7 months is that there's been this yo-yo effect, as I just mentioned, of after stress, that we have shock and outrage and shock and outrage. And it's causing this pattern to go. And that pattern is basically a hormonal release. It's a stress reaction. And that's causing us to get closer to burnout, as opposed to what naturally happens in our body, that we might have a stressor and then a steady state and then a stressor with a little bit longer interval. What's happening for us is almost a chronic or a constant, and that is impacting our health. So we're dealing with a lot. Those backpacks that we're wearing, whether we have one or not, but we're all wearing some type of backpack, it certainly weighs heavier today in October than it did, say, at the end of February. And I was out in California. Actually, I got to visit my grade E in California right before all this hit. And I know my backpack, and I coach on resilience. My backpack feels heavier in this moment. I think we all do to one degree or another. Well, to fast forward through my recovery, I was having a moment, and I had many moments, and this was a low moment. And a mentor had called, and we talked through some things. And with mentors, sometimes you have that great connection, right? Where you can just be really honest. You can be open and vulnerable and you just let them have it. And I was having that moment. And he said, you know what, Michael? All the events in your life are neutral until you label them. And I was like, huh? Because, going back, I was on many medications. So I thought he was playing this Jedi mind trick on me. I was like, what do you mean by that? He goes, all the events in your life are neutral until you label them. You get to choose your label. And when I thought about that, and it took me some time, that was not a light bulb went off in that moment. It took some time after we hung up, because he further went on and said, hey, Michael, nothing has meaning until you give it meaning. So what he was talking about is similar to what Viktor Frankl speaks about in Man's Search for Meaning, is that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, you can decide how you wish to respond to things. You can choose your labels. But we're so quick at it now. I don't want to blame all of social media, but I think social media is part of it. But we love to label things as right or wrong or good or bad. One of our greatest addictions that we have right now in this country is our addiction to being right. Somehow that curiosity muscle, it's atrophied. So we just want to label things. And with that label, we trigger that whole fight, flight, freeze reaction, and we go up and down and up and down. And then we wonder why we are so close to burnout. So this whole concept of neutrality gives us some space to say, okay, how do we wish to show up? How do we wish to tune in? Because after all, we are all just energy. Like whatever our vibe is, it has a ripple effect, like that stone that you toss in a pond, it ripples out. And we can show up with some energy that builds us together, that links us together, that's about love, as I mentioned, or it could be fear and worry and anger. Like whatever pond, or whatever stone we throw in the pond, it's going to ripple. We get to choose are ripples. So he told me, hey, why don't you try to breathe? So that was the second time that someone told me to breathe. So in this moment, one tip I want to give you tonight, this evening, is try to reconnect with your breath. And we're going to do something right now. I want to walk you through an exercise. So if you're on camera, if you want to take yourself off camera, you can do that. You can close your eyes if you wish. You can do basically a soft gaze. If you are into yoga, you know what that is, or meditation. So I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes, and I'm going to guide you through something that's going to take a few minutes, but we're going to have a little fun, and it will just be a really great way to slow things down, especially for everyone on the West Coast that you just came off a day probably filled with Zoom. So when you're ready, I just want you to deep breath in, hopefully through your nose, exhale through your nose. And for the next minute, I just want you to count your breaths. It's just one. Inhale, exhale, one. Just a normal cadence of your breath. You don't have to make your mind go blank or focus on any particular thing. Just count your breaths. Inhale, exhale, count. Inhale, exhale, count. And I'll let you have some space just to focus on your breath when you're counting. And as we get to the top of the minute, I just want you to take one more breath in, one more breath out, and then just remember what that number happens to be. And now we're going to transition. I want you to try to breathe in as slowly as possible, hopefully through your nose if you can do that, through your mouth if you can't. And then the slow, slow exhale. Exaggerated. If you're making noise, no worries. No one's going to judge you. Your dog's still going to love you. So inhale as slowly as possible. Exhale as slowly as possible. And as we come up to the top of the second minute, I'm just going to ask you to go back to just counting your breaths again. So just go back to your normal breath and just count inhale, exhale, one. Inhale, exhale, two. And as we come up to the top of the third minute, just one more inhale, and exhale. And I want you to remember that number. And now you can open your eyes. You can turn your camera back on if you want to turn your camera back on. If you don't, that's totally cool. But I imagine many of you probably took fewer breaths in that third minute than you did in the first minute. And if you did, just let me know, maybe in the chat, if you took fewer breaths in that third minute as you're counting than the first minute. So, yep. So without fail, one fewer, cool. Well, one fewer is good. So it's like the breath, I think, is going to be one incredible tool that we'll come back to in 2020. When we think about it, it's the one thing that we all have. And when I think, at least this is my perspective, and you may not share this perspective, and if that's the case, that's totally cool. But when I look at what COVID is doing, how it attacks our respiratory system, it takes our breath away. When I think of George Floyd, he lost his life because his breath was restricted. And when I think about people who've lost their job, I know I've lost my job in the past. You just hold your breath, hoping for your job to return, wondering how you're going to pay your bills. And for you out in California, or say in another part of the world in Australia, the wildfires, the heat and the smoke seared our breath. There's at least one common denominator with all four things that we're dealing with. It's our breath. And there's an excellent book I just want to give a plug to. I have no connection to James Nestor, but James Nestor wrote a book called Breath. And it really gives us a great history of the breath and how vital it is for our stress management and our overall health. And he talks about nasal breathing and all that jazz. So if you're looking for a good read as you finish out the year, I would recommend reconnecting with your breath. You can see probably over my shoulder here, there's a t-shirt called Pause, Breathe, and Reflect. So one of the things I did coming out of my recovery, because I knew I had to get my mind right to get my body right, was to slow down my breath, to think. And so I came up with something called Pause, Breathe, and Reflect. It's a simple box breathing technique where you just inhale for kind of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And for me, it's super important just to regulate my stress throughout the day. I'm sure you know, and people who meditate, you might meditate yourself, as I do, as a lot of people in my family do, where we might sit for 10, 20 minutes in the beginning of the day, but then I'm sure you know other people that do that, but then the rest of the day is a little frantic, hair on fire moments, if you will. And so for them, at least my perspective is that the whole connection with their breath hasn't yet been woven in throughout their whole life. So I'm a big believer that meditation is great, although I will say that it's probably not for everyone, maybe 97% of us. Now, back when I was recovering from my accident, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. I thought meditation was something, no offense to everyone from California, it was a crunchy granola California thing to do as an East Coaster. But then I just knew that connecting with my breath would help me slow things down so I could be thoughtful about how I wanted to go forward. I could have some intentionality in my day. So I could shape how I wish to tune in and show up for the world, show up for my recovery, show up for my rehab. And when you think about it, when you look at just the animal kingdom, when you take a lion, an antelope, and a turtle, and you think about their stress reaction, right? Say the lion is chasing the antelope. So the lion is in fight mode, the antelope is in flee mode. The turtle, if he's under attack, is sort of in freeze mode, hunkers down in their shell. But the thing about whatever role they're playing is that the biological response to it is similar. The lion that's chasing after the antelope, his blood pressure is raised or her blood pressure is raised, the heart is raised, they're tapping into a different part of their body. Same with the antelope, it's the whole fight, flight, and freeze. That from a heart rate, from a blood pressure, from what's happening in the body, cortisol, adrenaline, all that jazz, the same thing is happening to all three creatures. The thing that's different about them than us is that when the chase is over, you either get your antelope or you don't, things settle back down again until the next hunt. The thing about us as humans is that we stay in that mode. We all have a stress tolerance and we can generally navigate that. But in times like these, then we tend to be going above that threshold, that stress tolerance. And that's causing a lot of our stress, a lot of our burnout. I made this analogy back in April that I thought COVID was more like a triathlon than a marathon. We've all heard the old adage that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. I was like, well, COVID is a triathlon for any triathletes out there. It comes in 3 phases. And I thought, okay, well, this is going to come in 3 phases. The first phase, the way I saw it, was March, April, May. Chaos, a lot of adrenaline. We started doing a whole bunch more at work. We're working more hours. Those that still have a job, you are working more hours probably today than you were back in when this all began. But we were all jumping into the ocean all at the same time, and there wasn't really a lot of clarity. There was white water, people were kicking and pulling on each other. It was unclear. And then eventually we start settling in, maybe the summer, some sense of the control phase, trying to figure out, what do we have control with or of? I think that's the hard thing about this, is that, like, unlike a triathlon, we just don't know how long this is going to go on for. It's a race that has sort of no ending, and that makes it difficult. That uncertainty makes it difficult for us to feel a sense of control. But nevertheless, we're sort of in this control phase. We now know, like, what we can control in this moment. We can control how we wish to tune in and show up. We can control some of our actions. We can't necessarily control the actions of others, but we can control how we show up and tune in. Now, eventually, we're going to get to create. So, like I said, Normal left the building a long time ago with Elvis, when we haven't yet gone to the creation phase. We'll get there. That's the third leg of all this. So, as we go through this, controlling our breath is one way to be able to manage all this a little bit better. Because we're going to have moments where we're all going to get percolated. We're going to feel the stress. So coming back to our breath is a way to slow things down so we can be more thoughtful and intentional. So we don't react. We can respond maybe. And it can also help us, and this is one of my thoughts as I went through my recovery, if we can worry ourselves sick. And I came professionally into coaching from healthcare, and we all know that when the body is stressed chronically and we have a lot of worry, we can worry ourselves sick. Then I started to think, well, maybe you can think yourself well. Maybe the mind has that power, that instead of allowing our environment to shape our actions, we can shape our environment by how we show up. And I think the breath and mindset have a big stake in how we do just that. And we need to find a way to tap into it as we go through the rest of the year into 2021. Now, along the way, I also learned a really cool concept. I happen to work for a Japanese company, so there's a lot of really cool Japanese expressions that I've just grown to love. One is wabi-sabi, which is not wasabi, but wabi-sabi, which is the beauty of natural things. Because of my accident, I've been left with a lot of scars. So I like the nature of, like, our scars tell these beautiful stories. And Wabi Sabi talks about the natural beauty of things, which I think is so important in what sometimes can be an artificial world, a filtered world. Another one that I love is kintsugi. So you might know it as kintsugi art. My podcast is the Kintsugi podcast. So kintsugi is pottery that was pristine, but it broke. And they put it back together using gold fillet. It creates this scar-like type of appearance. They call it the golden repair. So I love the fact that, like, our scars and our wrinkles and our gray hairs and our blemishes, they tell this wonderful story about how resilient we are. So sometimes you get to a certain age where you just embrace all that, which I think is really wonderful. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's sexy. So, and then one is Mana no Aware, which is about the transient nature of life, that this moment too shall pass, that life is beautiful. And the reason why it's so beautiful is because it doesn't last forever. There's a picture of the cherry blossoms, and we started our family in DC, and people would flock to see the cherry blossoms in DC. And the thing is, the cherry blossoms only bloom for about 2 weeks. So Mana no Aware is about, like, taking in the beauty of the fact that the blossoms don't last forever. Same with life, that this moment too shall pass. So as we have big moments where we're shocked and outraged and surprised and all that, we should know that that moment will not last forever. It will eventually transition, even though sometimes it feels like it's going to last for a long time. And we want to get out of the muck. There's another phrase, it's not Japanese, I think it's Chinese, but it's basically no mud, no lotus, that we have to get through the mud in order for the lotus to bloom. So this whole concept that, okay, if we can connect with our breath and we can regulate, that this moment too shall pass. And this moment too shall pass, that we can move on. And so some way we can then be able to at least monitor how we're tuning in and showing up to the world. And that's important because right now we're dealing with a paradox of sorts. A couple of different ways of looking at the world. right? There used to be one way we used to do things. And I used to have my one way too before my accident, but that way wasn't necessarily producing the best results. On the surface, I had a really cool life, and I did, but I was pouring a lot of stress inside. And for anyone out there that pours a lot of stress inside, you know what I'm talking about. You pour it in, you pour it in, you pour it in, you try to repress it, you try to restrict it, and eventually it's going to pop out. So the one way, the old way, you know, there's some order to that. And there's some really great value in having order. And you think about life as a vessel, like there's some order there. And now we're in this like really complex world of like, which way? And everyone with a phone has a voice, which, you know, through one perspective is really cool. Another perspective, it's really loud, it's really noisy as we struggle to find the new way. But I know together we can find that. We can have some order in how we do things, how we behave to one another, that type of order, the values that we wish to honor, the virtues we wish to live by. And we can find a new way, because as a society, we have to find a new way. We have to have, again, both thoughts in our head at the same time, honoring structure and also looking to disrupt that so we can grow and solve tomorrow's complexities. And that's really stressful for folks. It's about having space in our head for more than one thought at a time. So in that space, there's some curiosity. And there's also a little bit of calm that allows us to weather this storm and be resilient. And a lot of the research I've done about resilient people, I've come up with a lot of cool things. And resilient people are, one, they have a greater awareness as far as their negative thought pattern. You know, that little voice in our head that we don't like to talk about at work, but we all have, even me. Well, we recognize when that's present. Resilient people are not overly optimistic. This is not the land of unicorns, rainbows, and an endless supply of Skittles, although it's almost Halloween, and an endless supply of Skittles sometimes, on some days, probably tastes pretty good. But there's purpose in our work. They view setbacks as growth opportunities, but they also practice non-judgment, which is really hard to do in today's world. So easy to judge. It's right there. But resilient people tend to believe that we are all perfectly imperfect. We all have some blemishes. We're all, you know, in a lot of ways, kintsugi art. But it's really hard, especially when we see other people that don't necessarily follow our values. It's so easy to judge in those moments. So one of the things I want to give you, and then we'll open it up for questions, is something I call grace. And so when I think of grace, I think of ballerinas and ballet, you know, stars. Like, they're so graceful on stage. And one of the things we know about ballerinas and folks that do ballet, their core is like unbelievably strong. Like, they're incredible athletes. And in this moment, to help weather all this, we need to strengthen our core. And don't think of this as like a sequential that we're going to go from G to R, A, C, E, but almost as our core as a complete unit. And I want to walk you through some of these. And these are all things that I found along my journey. I used in my corporate life, I use today to help me in these moments so I can manage my energy better. And we're going to start with gratitude, something I knew little about when I first had my accident. But gratitude is so powerful. There's a really good book by A.J. Jacobs called Thanks 1,000. He thanks 1,000 people who helped him with his coffee every morning. It's a wild read. It's a quick read, but it gives you a new perspective on something that's so common, your Starbucks, and how many people touch your Starbucks. And he went on this quest to thank everyone who touched it. So gratitude helps us see what's working in the world. It can be like little things, it can be big things, it can even be the challenge, because we know this, even though we're in it and we don't really want to accept it, that our challenging moments often lead to our most growth, like post-traumatic growth, if you will. And one way I do it is every night as I'm brushing my snacks, that's what we call teeth in our household, I think about what I'm grateful for the day. And it could be, you know, something small. It could be someone let me into traffic or held the door open when we were not 6 feet apart. It Could be that great meal my wife made. It could be a whole bunch of different things. It could even be the challenge in the moment when I'm struggling. And with gratitude, it gives us a moment to put some meaning on things. And it also helps us shift our perspective, which leads us to reframing it. And this is, again, all events are neutral until we label them. Reframing allows us to look at things a little bit of a different way. What's another way of looking at this? What's another perspective? How do we see things from the other person's perspective? And this important question, is this happening to me or for me? When I was in the early phases of my recovery, I thought my accident happened to me. I was playing the victim, and I had every right to, one would argue. A lot of people validated that, but my mentor said, you know, maybe this is happening for you. And I believe now that it happened for me, not to me, as I think COVID is happening for us, not to us. It's shining a spotlight on some of the things that we need to place on our to-do list in a way that only this moment could do. And I say that, and that's really hard. And I know not everyone agrees with me on this, but because there's so much pain, suffering, and loss in this moment, but I think it's happening for us. So we can make some course corrections. And reframing also helps us with that transient nature of life, the mono no aware, to say, like, this moment too shall pass. What's another way of looking at it? How do I shift my perspective, even ever so slightly, so I can see maybe things from a different angle? I can be curious just for a moment. And it doesn't mean I have to agree with the other person. It just means that, you know what, they might have a perspective that is just as valid as mine. And from there, maybe we can have a really great conversation, which is something I know, grant you, that we've sort of lost our ability to have. But I do believe we can find that altogether. The A in GRACE stands for agility. One, because I love dogs. We're a big dog family. We also have cats. But I think agility, along with resilience, will be two currencies that we need a lot of going into 2021. And agility for me is built through awareness. So how to slow down to go faster. There's a really good, another good book. I'm doing a whole bunch of book plugs, which I was not anticipating doing tonight, but I'm doing it. So Celeste Headley from NPR, she wrote a great book called Do Nothing. Excellent read. So but this awareness, so we can open up our aperture so we can see more about ourselves, more about others, and we can get to acceptance. So we stop arguing with reality. So we can see things like, it's like this, which is not, it is what it is. That's different. Acceptance is, hey, it's like this. And so once we have acceptance, then we can take some action, even if it's really small. I'm a big believer in baby steps, or to use a cycling analogy, small pedal strokes over time, one after another. That's how we get down the road together. So that those micro steps can be so magical. I know in a lot of ways we want this big hack, these big steps. We want an easy path towards that better life, but life happens through awareness, acceptance, action, and then adjustment. Because really, we're never truly ready. We're going to have to make iterations upon iterations upon iterations. We're going to have to do micro adjustments as we go, because we're never going to get it just right. And that's a message to all the perfectionists out there, that sometimes you just got to go and put it out there, and then you can make changes to it as you go. You can adjust. You can have some agility. So that's the A in the GRACE model. The C is community, what I like to call your Peloton. So for those that don't know, who are not cyclists, a Peloton, think Tour de France, all those wonderfully colorful guys and gals riding in the Tour de France, that's called a Peloton. They're all on different teams, but they all need each other. They're all going to the same destination, the finish line. Now, there's no finish line in life, right? Life is not a game that's won or lost, contrary to some people's opinion. But a Peloton, they need each other. They need each other to draft off of, to point out road hazards, to communicate, to collaborate, all that. And in life, in school, in our career, we also need a Peloton. I like to think of it as our personal board of directors. Who are you riding with in life? The reality is that if we all are on this planet, we're all in the same Peloton, because we all share the same space. But in our communities, who's in our Peloton? Who brings out the best in us? And this moment in time, we need to make sure that we're riding with people who bring out the best in us. And I like to look at it, and there's a workbook on the Pitzer community board that you can pull down, and up in the chat, if you scroll up, there's a link to pull it off. I have a little worksheet that can help you build your Peloton. I like to think of it as 5 roles. There's someone professionally and personally in your life that can be there for you when you need some clarity. They're the ones asking you the really thought-provoking questions. So when you're stuck, they help you get unstuck. And then there's that person that will challenge you, will confront you, if you will, who will take you outside your comfort zone. Who is that person in your life? And then there's that person that comes to you when you have your 911, your crisis. They're there for you. They drop everything and they're there for you. Of course, we need someone to be there for comfort when we're hurt. And they're there and they're all about you. They're not like, oh, I know you feel hurt, but I feel hurt too. They allow you to have your hurt, to allow you to feel what you need to feel, to be there to comfort you in that moment where you need comfort. And then finally, that person there that will celebrate you. Who is that person? And when they celebrate you, they celebrate all of you. And they're not trying to take any of your celebration away. They're present for you in that moment. Like, who's in your Peloton? We need people like that. Because life, career, school, all of it ain't solo projects. We need people. The thing that's spreading this virus is the fact that we need to be with each other. We want to be with each other. And also some behavior that's questionable. But I think the way to get out of this moment too is the fact that we're connected with each other, that we are showing up in service for one another. We are acting as if we're in the same Peloton. That's how we get out of this moment and flip into 2021. And then finally, when we look at E, is energy management. So before COVID, when we used to work in offices, I would often ask my clients if they were bringing home their energy leftovers. They would spend all their time at work, all their energy at work, and all they had left was their energy leftovers when they came through that front door. They were totally spent at work because they weren't managing their energy well at work. And I definitely was guilty of this back in my corporate life. And I'm not sure about you, but cold pizza every now and again, yeah, it's pretty good. But cold pizza every night, oof, gets old. So how do we get better alignment? And I feel that great alignment comes, one, from a spiritual, not religious, but a spiritual sense, like your values, your vision, who you are. Emotionally, if you're focused, are you multitasking? Are you present? Are you here now, as Eckhart Tolle would say? There's a physical and health component, right? So if you don't have your health, I know this personally, you would trade almost anything to have your health back. There's your sense of your community, who's in your Peloton. And then finally, your alignment to your career and your just financial health. Like when you have alignment, like anything in alignment, it just works better. And when our life is in alignment, life just works better. And with our energy, going back to breath, where we take a moment to just pause, breathe, and reflect to slow things down, going through that breathing exercise, all you did for a minute was just slow your breath down. And then what your body did was slow the next minute of your breath down. It's pretty remarkable. So when you have a chance to pause, breathe, and reflect during the day, it gives you a chance to release whatever you need to release. Maybe throw out a few of those rocks in your backpack so you can return or renew your energy and then return with some focus so you can get more stuff done. So that's energy management. So this whole principle of grace helps you develop a really strong core. So with that strong core, you can avoid some burnout and manage stress better. So I'll leave you with a couple more slides and then we'll turn into some questions. Is one, a bit of encouragement. I love the black and white cookie. That's the only thing I really like that's binary. So it's either black or the white. It's a New York thing. So I love my black and white cookie. But I don't like to look at life in binary. We do so much of that already. But I would say this, it's going to be somewhat of a binary statement though, is that we've all, if we're on this call, if we're showing up in the world right now, we have survived 100% of our bad days. We will get through 2020 and we get to then experience 2021. Even though it's really tough, there's some beautiful lessons in this moment. Again, I want to acknowledge the pain, suffering, and loss that's happening, but I do think there's some really beautiful things that are coming out of this moment in time that is, again, happening for us, not to us. That we can use this moment to hopefully create a better tomorrow. And as we go forward on this journey called life and career and school and all that jazz and community, it's this concept that we go where our eyes go. In essence, like where we place our attention is where we place our energy. So when we look for everything that's wrong in the world, everything to get worked up about, everything on social that sparks comparison or outrage or whatever, then you know what? We're going to find more of that. In some ways, if you watch Social Dilemma, if you click on that stuff, they'll feed you more of that stuff. So if we look at our bodies as vessels, like what we're putting in it, hydration, food, but information, people, you name it, emotions, like we're going to go wherever our eyes happen to go. This is also like a term or a practice out of cycling. In order to go around the turn faster, we have to sort of look around the turn. The bike will go in the direction we point our eyes. If we look at the tree that's right in front of us, most likely we're going to hit the tree. Like people say, watch out, don't hit that. And then we end up hitting that. But if we can shift our perspective on maybe some of the things that are going well, maybe we see more of that. And those can be more building blocks for us to create something that's better from all that. So we can reach for better because we know normal left. So this whole concept of, hey, where are we placing our attention? Because wherever you're placing your attention, that's where you're placing your energy. That's what you're burning calories on. And I know you can do so much more in the world as far as making a difference if you point your eyes in a different direction. And that doesn't mean ignoring the stuff that's happening. It's just holding some space that you can have both things there, but you're going to choose to look at some of the things that you can build upon. And that will eventually help you write your story. We're going to look back on this period of time. I remember talking to our girls maybe a couple years ago, and we were talking about growing up, and we're at a certain age where we've had some moments, 9/11, space shuttle, Challenger, like we remember where we were when that stuff happened. And they're like, we have nothing. Our generation has nothing. And now they have something. Their kids will ask them about this moment in time. And we're all going to create this story about how we went through this moment. We'll pass on. No, we're storytellers, us human beings, and we're going to write this story about this moment in time and what happened and what came out of it. And we get to choose. We get to choose our labels. And that's incredibly powerful. And I hope you write a wonderful story. And I hope it's a story that has a foundation in love. So if we do nothing else tomorrow coming out of this, what I'm hoping for is that we find a way to help people feel loved. Because ultimately, I think that wins out in the end of the day. Marketers can peddle in fear and worry and anxiety, and leaders and a whole bunch of stuff. But we can peddle in love, that we can build community. And I think that's what makes Pitzer so amazing, is that there's this vibe and energy and love when you're on campus, and then you're just on calls like this. So that's what I hope we can get to. So program note, we're gonna have another one of these Thursday at 5. I'm gonna give you my contact information here, but I do wanna get to a couple different questions. And Jill, I wanna turn it over to you too to facilitate. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, I guess. But I wanna get to 3 questions that we got pre-call. One is from Carlos, class of 15. So how do you challenge inconsistency in improving motivation, energy, and a desire to continue working towards goals? So my advice, Carlos, is to have some level of slack in your day. A lot of times we want things to be just so, like there's a binary way, one way of looking at things, or we jam our days just full with stuff, a lot of do, as I mentioned earlier. So for me, let's take, if maybe one of your goals is health, as an example, then I want to have enough slack that I can show up every day. One of my values that I wish to honor in the workbook, I give you a values exercise, is health. So a really prime A type of day is that I get to get on my bike and I get to work out and eat really healthy and all that jazz. So that is like, that's my great day. But there's some days back before COVID, I would travel and that wasn't possible. So I would give myself a few other options. There might be an A, there might be a B, and there might be a C option. All options help me in some form or fashion honor my value of health. So I give myself a little bit of wiggle room. A lot of times when we set up our goals, we get too rigid, we get too strict. And then it becomes, hey, if we hit them all, we're happy. If we don't, we're sad. And then that sadness, that bad moment can spill into the next day. And all of a sudden we have a bad moment getting more fuel than it deserves. And then it turns into a bad day. The reason why I labeled July 11, 2001 as my last bad day is I could choose my labels. And I realized that any day I could hit the pillow and my girls and my wife were still in my life, how could I call that a bad day? It may not have been exactly how I planned it to be, but I still had some building blocks. So that's my recommendation, is have a little bit of slack, have a few more options in your days to help you navigate some of the inconsistency, because we're all going to have some level of inconsistency. Okay, Nicole, you asked from class of 90, tips on how to help stress and anxiety due to burnout. Well, one big one that I mentioned is just connecting with your breath throughout the day. Another big one, as temperatures ease, hopefully to get back out into nature. There's some real calming effects that can produce some wonderful health benefits of just getting out into nature. So I would go back to the GRACE model and also reconnecting with your breath as a way to sort of reduce some of the stress and anxiety, and try to weave it throughout your day as opposed to doing it in one chunk like meditation in the morning and check the box. I'm a big believer of weaving gratitude and connecting with your breath throughout the course of your day. And then Karen had a question about managing workload and things not on our workload, like checking email. So here are some tips, Karen. So one, every morning I start with 20 ounces of water before I check email and social. So if you're sleeping with your phone, and some of you have to sleep with your phone, I totally get it. Try not to look at email and social before you really fully wake up. It'll be there. Have a glass of water and ask yourself these 3 questions. How do you wish to be today? What do you wish to do? Priority setting, more on that to come. And what do you wish to have more of? And to set your priorities, what you wish to do today, I ask myself this question every evening. When I look at my calendar, what are my 6 key priorities for the following day? And I try to rank them in order. It's a process that Ivy Lee came up with back in 1918. It's really retro. Now, not everything retro is good, but this one I think is pretty good. So 6 key essentials, rank order them, and I try to tackle one at a time so I can move the needle on that. And when I move the needle on stuff, and when you do, it starts to change our inner chatter. So we start to build some momentum. So you might do more than 6, you might do less than 6. If you do less than 6, the 2 that you might not get to, yeah, you can save them for the next day. So instead of having a massively long to-do list, I try to look at 6 priorities, work on those the following day, do that process each night as a routine. So that's one way to start my morning. Water, those 3 questions. The what to do is influenced by the process I did in the evening. And then I try to do something to connect my mind and body together, just to wake myself up. And once I go through that, it takes like about 15 minutes, then I'll check email. The email can wait. And then with email, one tip I would often recommend to folks is monitoring how much email you're sending. Because a lot of times we send a whole bunch of email out, and the more email we send out that may not be necessary, well, we get the gift of a whole bunch of emails coming back. So being more mindful of, hey, does this need an email right now? Am I doing an email unnecessarily? And first monitoring our own email practices as a way to better manage those. So Jill, those were the 3 questions I had pre our webinar tonight. I'm not sure if there's others that folks have.
Yeah, if there are questions people want to ask, please do put them in the chat. I wanted to just ask a little bit more about like, again, just the unexpected thing and how to, what I find is that I realize I've been in a silo in my mind, like how to help us break out of something that's script, that we realize much later, we let that happen.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Joe. Like sometimes we can get hijacked pretty easily when we get into a silo. I think one, as we develop more awareness, we can feel when we're stressed. We can feel when we're percolated. I know I feel it in certain ways, and I imagine you feel it in certain ways. And so when we get stuck like that, I'll go back to like the pause, breathe, and reflect process. That helps us slow things down a bit. So it allows the body to start processing some of the stress hormones. It can lower our heart rate, lower our blood pressure. And from there, then we can ask, that question, that reframing question, like, is this moment happening for me or to me? It's also another moment to say, okay, who can I lean on in this moment in time? Maybe I'm stuck. Maybe I need to, call someone in my community, someone in my Peloton to help me through this. And it could be like, all right, what am I experiencing right now? And do I wish to just experience this? So I think it's perfectly natural that we feel a whole bunch of different emotions in this moment in time: anger, frustration, sadness, confusion, worry, guilt, a whole, every emotion under the sun. So sometimes we just need to feel that emotion and be good with that. Like feel what you need to feel. When we stay there too long, or if it gets too yo-yo-y, I think that's where we get into some health problems. And if we have a pattern like that, that's when we need maybe some other people to be there in support for us to help us through that moment, just to be able to talk it out, if we can't necessarily coach ourselves out of that moment. So my process when I get stressed, when I get hijacked on some things, and believe me, I get hijacked on plenty of things. One, I try to go back to my breath. I try to see, hey, is this moment happening for me or to me? I get to choose my label, if you will. I try to look back. Is there anything in my past that's similar? Maybe I can pull from that in this moment in time. And who can I lean on right now to help me through this moment? Because again, we can't go through life and our careers by ourselves. We hopefully have people in our lives, people in our Pelotons that we can lean on to help us through these difficult moments as we're going through.
Great. I appreciate that. Well, unless anyone can unmic themselves if they want and ask a question, but I did want to just kind of loop back to the workbook that we have available, and again, any advice from you on how folks can utilize it starting today.
Yeah, sure thing, Jill. Well, the first part of it is an energy assessment, which is good, talking about what we talked about today. And the back part of it is some exercises. One, for you to noodle what your vision is for the future. Like, hey, where do you want to be 6 months from now, a year from now? And where you might see your values that you wish to honor. I think if you don't know your top 5 values in this moment in time, I think it would be good to go through that exercise. It's a hard one to whittle down 80 values down to top 5, but these 5 help serve as your North Star, a little bit of a compass, if you will. The things that you really want to honor in your life. A lot of times we say yes to a whole bunch of everything. We overextend ourselves. By focusing in on our values, we can be a little bit more specific to what we say yes to and also what we say no to. So our values, again, serve as a great compass. And then there's another exercise just to structure that Peloton of yours, to make sure that you have the right people riding alongside of you, the right people in your community. So all that gives us, like, again, going back to core is, hey, where do I want to go? What are the values that will serve as my compass? And then who's coming with me on this beautiful ride known as life and career and school? And then if anybody wants to talk to me further about it, you can reach out to me. Happy to help. Like, again, as a family, we love the Pitzer community. We're honored to be part of it. So if I can be of any assistance to anyone in our Pitzer family, I'm all about it. So just reach out. Happy to talk to you.
Great. Well, in helping conclude this, I just want to say exclamation point.
Thanks, Jill.
It was awesome. Thank you for the outstanding workshop. Just a great resource for our community, and you really hit the nail on the head as far as what people are feeling, and we got a great response about that. So please, yes, absolutely. And so again, thankfully, folks can view the video later or share it, with a person who needs to see it. And remember that this Thursday we'll continue with a discussion with you as far as kind of switching lanes during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone on Thursday. And if you can't make it, totally understand. It'll be recorded. But if anybody wants to connect with me offline, like my email's here, my phone's here, my website, and happy to connect. I put out a weekly vlog every Sunday. It's a little copy, a little video. It's pithy enough, just something to noodle as you have your coffee every Sunday morning. So, but I look forward to seeing everyone on Thursday. Jill and Brooke, thank you again for all your assistance, and I'll see you in a couple days.
Yes, our pleasure, and see you in a couple days. Bye-bye, everybody. See you soon.
Bye-bye.